Welcome to another episode of the Chill by Nette podcast. This podcast is created for those who are passionate about their personal development, health, and well-being. This is a platform for you to come chill by my personal stories and weekly tips in becoming a better version of ourselves and to live a better present. But first, let's chill. My name is Jeanette. Welcome back. So in the last episode, we discussed the importance in recognizing the concept of safe spaces through my personal experience. We talked about how a safe space is an opportunity for people to be themselves without any judgment and feel confident enough to express their views in the context of mental and emotional well-being. And we see that although it's a simple concept, it can have a very huge impact in the lives of people who need it. And in this episode, we will focus on what it takes to be an effective one as I share my 3 powerful tips on how each of us in our own context can be the safe space for our loved ones and people around us who need it. So I realized that we are often quick to judge and correct people's views sometimes, and it's just part of how humans are wired. We have our own opinions and perspectives which are shaped by our very own experiences. And because of that, it makes the concept of a safe space so important in our society today. This is so that we don't shut out real conversations and genuine connections. No matter how much we have grown over the years and how much self-confidence we have gained throughout, we never outgrow the need for safety. So as humans, we still constantly look for support when we fall. And when we get upset, we look for validation and encouragement from people around us. And besides, no one can constantly live in that kind of state of vigilance and fearing their views will be rejected all the time. And hence, we are all in need for such safe spaces where we can just be ourselves without having the need to justify and defend ourselves sometimes. And the good news is anyone can be that safe space, and I will be sharing my 3 tips in becoming one. So tip number 1, be present. And being present here is not about, physically being there with the person. You can be present even via a phone call or, digital means like video conference. But then the concept about being present is really about being able to devote your full attention and immerse yourself in the conversation. So I'm not sure if you can relate, but there are just some conversations we get into which, just made us feel like the world just stopped because both parties are just so into the conversation itself and that we have no idea what is happening around us. And this is the kind of connectedness and presence we want when we talk about, creating that safe space. I think, to me, it's the foundation to create or rather be a safe space for another person. And just how we behave can send out signals as to whether we are trying our best to listen and understand the other person. This includes your speed of response, quality of response, your body language, eye contact, and basically whether or not we are present can be seen through our verbal and non-verbal cues. So it's really about making the other person perceive that you are in the conversation and you're interested to, put down your judgment, your views and everything for them at the instance and, hold that space for them. So on this point, if you ask me if it's necessary to leave out your judgment to be that safe space, I would say that creating a safe space is not all about leaving your judgment out. Although in most cases, I think it does because you want to put the other person's views and emotions first so that they can feel heard and feel confident, which is really the point of a safe space. But in some other times, after that space is given, I think constructive feedback is probably what the other person perceives to be helpful as well. And that is where, your advice and your feedback can come in. But then, of course, when there's a time to include our judgment, I think learn to not use absolute terms like, you should do this, you should do that, and maybe rather strive for a more suggestive approach. Like, have you tried this? Do you think this would work? And the part about giving feedback is make sure that we don't leave our emotions out too. So that is to include, how certain things are making us feel. So for instance, I'm giving you this feedback because I care for you and it makes me feel sad that you're going through this, and I would like to offer my support and help at this point. I believe that only in a conversation with the presence of emotions, we can then deepen that connection. And it will make the other person feel like you are being real with them. And this adds to the presence that we are talking about here. Okay, I think that sounds like, 2 tips in one. But anyways, okay, tip number two is to ask questions, and to be more specific, ask questions in a way that demonstrates genuine curiosity. So it's a lot about how we ask our questions for this tip on question asking to be effective. And I think before you ask any questions for someone in need, maybe ask yourself first, what is the intention behind asking certain questions? When you're asking, are you asking with the opportunity to judge or to offer your opinion? Or are you genuinely curious and want to understand what the other person is going through and be ready to see whatever emotions coming through as valid? Because I think this is what the person needs now, and people can feel this quite strongly, especially when they are in a super vulnerable state. And on this point is really about how we ask our questions. So for instance, when we ask a why question, it's usually easier for people to feel judged and defensive, and it pushes people to, explain themselves and justify themselves. And I think judgment is the number one factor that drives people away from being vulnerable and being connected to someone else. For example, if I want to be there for someone who is crying or having a downtime, instead of asking them, why are you sad? Why are you crying? Why are you feeling this way? That people cry because they are sad, and you can ask them what is making them sad instead. And you would like to offer your support because you know how that feels. Now, you may not understand how certain things upset certain people because we all get affected in different ways. But you know how sadness feels to some extent, and that's enough. So one way to connect is to demonstrate that you know how hard is it for the person and how the person feels. And, although I do recognize that sometimes it's not really possible to completely put ourselves in another person's shoe, but, sometimes just by showing that we are there and we are trying our best to understand what the other person is going through, I think that itself, provides tremendous comfort. And tip number 3 is to be vulnerable yourself. So sometimes to be a safe space, we need to be vulnerable ourselves. And this is one tip that a lot of people missed out. We can be that listener or we can encourage questions, but if we don't show vulnerability in the process as well, then I would say that, we cannot form genuine connections and encourage people to show up at the end of the day. Like, to encourage vulnerability, you also have to be vulnerable yourself. And that often looks like admitting something that you do not know, or sharing your struggles or challenges as well, because when you're letting your full self out to connect with the person, the person can feel it, and in return they will trust you more and they will find it safer to connect to you as well. Real connection is built through vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities in turn also builds real connection. So it's really, mutually reinforcing in that way. So let's think about this in the context of an organization, all right? Would you feel safer admitting your mistakes to someone who also admits theirs? I would. And in fact, research has shown that, leaders who are willing to be more vulnerable can lead better, so long as their vulnerability is not about their core competency. They can lead better and create higher performing teams. So for instance, a production leader cannot be displaying his incompetence in his core expertise like leadership or the production process, but he can admit answers that he doesn't have. So admitting that we do not know something, for instance, saying things like, I don't have all my answers, but I want to count on you to explain to me. or I don't have much understanding on this topic, is new to me. Could you help me understand this? So this builds a sense of safety. It will really help to open the door to encourage more struggles, or rather unconventional ideas, to be heard, when we sometimes learn to admit that we want to learn from that person and we do not have all our answers. And the last thing you want to do is really on the other spectrum, when you inject doubt and deny everything that a person wants to share, and they just end up walking around eggshells. So on this note, I just want to share a rather personal story. So I remember a few weeks ago, I approached my dad, during lunch, and it's just the two of us, and I told him, hey, Pa, I launched my very first podcast. And then after I said that, there was silence, and I felt quite nervous actually, because I seldom talk to my dad about my personal life and my personal stuff. But I decided to, because as part of encouraging people to open up, I just want to, take the step to be more open to people around me as well. And then shortly, the first thing he asked was, "What's a podcast? Explain to me. I don't know what's that." And at that moment, I remember that I felt relieved. And I'm relieved at the fact that, he wanted to know more. So I started explaining to him with a lot of passion, a lot of excitement, and what I could do with it, like how I want to help more people out there. And then, there was silence again. And then we continued eating. But I did observe his expression, and, whether or not he was listening. It wasn't an expression of disapproval. And then at the same time, he was also listening to me attentively when I was explaining. That to me was actually quite a great comfort, because internally I knew that he did not refuse my views, and probably he had his own views as well. But, at that point of time, I think he chose to keep it to himself and did not impose his opinions of any sort to me at that point, when I was sharing my feelings and my thoughts. I felt hurt, even though he did not say much or express much, but through his body language, I knew he was interested to learn more and hear more from me. So really, being a safe space can just be as simple as, even your body language, the way you make eye contact, and even small gestures like, nodding of your head when you listen to the other person. Because the people in need for these spaces scan for these things, and we talk about how a safe space looks different to different people. And I knew that my dad was trying his best to put his judgments aside. And the fact that he asked me what's a podcast, he's admitting that he doesn't know and he wants to learn more. And this allows me to, more confidently express what I want to share. And this also marks a moment when I realized that, wow, I can actually start to communicate more authentically to my dad. It's not that we don't communicate, it's just that, the stuff that we talk about are normally the day-to-day casual talks. Casual talks are important, but it seldom grows connection. And for there to be connections, I think emotions must be involved. And I also do feel that it was a big step for my dad as well, because in the past, our conversations will usually end up in one person crying, and that's me, because sometimes I just feel that my views or my emotions are not heard in the way that I want it to be. As we have very different opinions, neither would be absolutely correct or wrong, but because he's often that figure that I look up to so much and I respect so much, I usually just doubt my own views instead of having the courage to pursue it. So what I want to say was, when we feel like we are denied of something, especially from someone who is so important to us, we often feel very hurt, especially if the person has a huge influence over you and he matters a lot to you. So being a safe space, I realize, is even more important if we have a huge influence over the other person. So for instance, if you are a leader of an organization, I think the responsibility to create a safe space just seems to be even more important, because people rely on you for that affirmation and that validation. And your words and actions are powerful because it can determine the emotional development of the other person. It can determine whether, others are able to speak up confidently. So everyone plays an important role to someone in their lives. And I just feel that, let's not forget to start seeing this as a personal responsibility to be that safe space for each other. Although I do recognize that sometimes not everyone has the mental capacity to be a safe space because they are really going through so much internally and, the situation just doesn't allow them sometimes. But, it all starts from within. So even if you're not able to be a safe space for someone else right now, you can at least be that safe space for yourself, right? You can choose to treat yourself kinder. Don't judge yourself. Tell yourself, talk to yourself like how you would talk to a best friend, because self-healing can sometimes go a very long way, and how you talk to yourself really matters. So creating that safe space for yourself is really trusting what your mind and your body feels, and give yourself the space to express whatever that you are feeling so that you can feel confident and feel psychologically safe. So don't judge your thoughts, be kinder to yourself, and avoid criticizing how you are thinking and how you are feeling. And then slowly, one step at a time, when you're able to create that space for yourself, you will then be in a better position to also create that space for your loved ones around you. Okay, but one step at a time, there's no need to rush. Alright, so just to recap my 3 tips. Number 1, be present. Be that zone that is free of distraction, where you can fully immerse yourself in the conversation, and that includes being able to listen attentively and also include your emotions when you want to provide certain feedback. Tip number 2, ask questions. Be curious about what people are going through, but without judgment, and validate people's feelings throughout the process. And lastly, allow your own weaknesses to be seen and admit that we have a lot to learn from others as well. So be that safe space to others, just like how we all need a safe space from time to time. And I really hope that this episode will allow us to start thinking how we can, in our own context, start taking steps towards becoming that person who can be a source of support to others, or sometimes even yourself, especially in such challenging times. And that often means acting with more kindness and less judgment. Thanks for chilling in. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe. You can also connect with me on Instagram at chillbynette, on my website chillbynette.com, to join the conversation and access our show notes. Have a great day, and we'll chill again very soon.